Hello and welcome to Discern This. I'm your host, Lonzo Cook. Our guest today is Dr. Joaquim Goes, biological oceanographer at Columbia University's Climate School. His current research centers on how ocean ecosystems are responding to climate change. Dr. Goes, welcome to Discern This.
Thank you for having me on your show. Glad to be here.
You've described algae as being the bellwether organism for human-driven climate and environmental change. First off, what are algae, and what role do they play in the global ecosystem?
Algae are basically phytoplankton that float in the sea. They are able to photosynthesize and fix atmospheric carbon dioxide. So they essentially remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And they do this with the help of sunlight, and they produce oxygen. So every breath of oxygen, every second breath of oxygen that you take is coming from oceanic phytoplankton or oceanic algae. Now, they have an important role in the food chain as well because they form the base of the food chain, and all other organisms depend on the organic matter that is produced by this phytoplankton to sustain their metabolism. So the fish that you eat comes from what the phytoplankton draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
One of your main areas of study is invasive algal blooms, such as the recurring one in the Arabian Sea. Could you tell us about the scale of that particular algal bloom, and how does it come about?
This particular species of algae that is occurring in the Arabian Sea is called Noctiluca scintillates. It's commonly known as sea sparkle. It was never seen in the Arabian Sea until about 2000, the year 2000. And ever since then, it has grown in size, spatial extent, and it is spreading rapidly and has overtaken the ecosystem. What started as a small patch in 2000, in the year 2000, is now about 3 times the size of Texas, and that is the scale of this organism. So this organism is not your typical phytoplankton. It fixes atmospheric carbon dioxide like your normal phytoplankton with the help of endosymbionts, but it also feeds on other organisms. So it is able to outcompete everything that is there in the water. So it has a huge impact on the food web because nothing feeds on it. And it's giving rise to large jellyfish and salt blooms that we see in the Arabian Sea today.
Should we understand the bloom to be primarily the result of human-related activity, such as fertilizer or sewage runoff?
Yeah, this organism thrives in oceanic waters that are rich in urea and ammonium. And the major sources of that in the ocean, especially the coastal ocean, are fertilizers and runoff from land. And in countries surrounding the Arabian Sea, like India, Pakistan, which are predominantly agricultural economies, a lot of the fertilizers are unutilized, and they make their way into the rivers and eventually into the coastal oceans. And these fertilizers actually form the initial, or they provide the initial nutrients for this organism. But climate change has a huge impact. So over the past 20 years or so, the Arabian Sea has warmed by about 1.5 degrees centigrade. And it may seem like a small temperature difference over this 20-year period, but we are talking about an average over the entire Arabian Sea. Now, it has not only become warmer, the water column has become more stratified or more stable. And this is a perfect environment for this organism to grow. And the other issue is that these fertilizers and that are coming from land have also resulted in the hypoxic layer or the low oxygen waters spreading in the Arabian Sea. And one of the reasons why this organism thrives in those waters in the Arabian Sea is because this area that is coming under low oxygen waters is spreading rapidly as well. So you have not only warming due to climate change, you also have the spread of hypoxia due to the warming and the nutrients coming from the land. So this utilize fertilizers from agricultural waste and also human untreated sewage that is coming into the Arabian Sea, or partially treated sewage.
I guess the scientific phrase would be anthropomorphic eutrophication.
Yes, the scientific term is called eutrophication, and that's a term that's generally used by policymakers or decision makers. But the real nutrient loading is what describes eutrophication. So this is not a problem that is only unique to, for instance, the Arabian Sea. Here back home in New York City, Long Island Sound experiences eutrophication. They have so many sewage treatment plants that produce this hypoxia, and that results in bloom formation, harmful algal bloom formation during summer, late summer and fall. And in the Gulf of Mexico, for instance, we have a huge dead zone, and that is being fed by fertilizers that are coming through the Mississippi River.
And by dead zone, you mean an area of very low oxygen and declining fish?
Exactly. These hypoxic layers are areas where the oxygen concentrations are very subnormal, and they reduce the metabolic rate at which organisms perform. And so it slows down their growth. The organism has to work twice or thrice at times to meet its metabolic requirements. And there's a huge expansion of energy in doing so. And so they do not grow too well. So there are some organisms that thrive in low oxygen waters. One of them is sea sparkle or Noctiluca, but there are many others that do not do well under these conditions.
Dr. Goes, what makes Noctiluca so special?
Yeah, one of the reasons that makes it special is because of this ability to photosynthesize with the help of its endosomians, which are enslaved in its central cytoplasm or its central cell. And the other thing is that they feed on other stuff in the water. So anything that's smaller and even slightly larger than Noctiluca is consumed by Noctiluca itself. And so because of this dual ability to photosynthesize and feed on other stuff, Noctiluca is able to thrive in these waters. And what is special about this organism, it is an organism that seems to be doing well under hypoxic conditions. And now that we have this situation in the Arabian Sea where you have low oxygen waters and high CO2, it appears to be doing better than any other organism. So, and it's spreading so rapidly. So over this 20-year period, it has expanded so rapidly. And this is the only ecosystem that I've studied that has undergone so much change in such a short span of time.
So is it its dual respiratory ability that enables it to outcompete other plankton?
Yeah, so it's this heterotrophic ability, and it doesn't allow the other organisms to grow.
It eats other things.
Yes, so it doesn't allow them to grow. And it's an aggressive feeder as well. So, and the other special property of Noctiluca, if I may say so, is that nothing feeds on Noctiluca. None of the hydrophic organisms like zooplankton can easily feed on Noctiluca. And because it's not palatable to other organisms, the only thing that eats it is jellyfish or salps. And these are in turn consumed by, you have cuttlefish or squid. So the emergence of Noctiluca as an organism that is dominating the base of the food chain in the Arabian Sea for not a few weeks, like typical blooms occur. This one lasts for about 3 months. And so if it is there in the ecosystem for about 3 months, it can alter the food chain so easily. So over the past few years, landings from several countries around the Arabian Sea have shown that the catch of fish has gone down, but we are seeing a rise in squid and cuttlefish. So in the Middle East, for instance, squid and cuttlefish are not the primary sources of seafood that they depend on. So most of it goes to exports probably. So some other countries might be benefiting from this cuttlefish or squid, but not the countries in that area.
I'd like to double click on that. As Noctiluca alters the food chain away from fish and towards squid and salps, is there an upside?
There is an upside. It's not all doom and gloom. Noctiluca has certain properties that can be harnessed. For instance, it accumulates a lot of ammonium and uric acid within its central cytoplasm. So imagine if you can harvest this Noctiluca blooms and use it as fertilizer. Another unique property of Noctiluca is that it has got UV absorbing compounds. And that's the reason why it is able to thrive under this high tropical light intensities, which contain a lot of UV light. And so these UV absorbing compounds actually protect the photosynthetic machinery from damage. But can you imagine this could be a natural source of UV protectants for human beings, for instance. You could use these compounds in creams, some kind of cosmetics that people normally use as sunscreen. So there's an upside to it as well. Noctiluca may have many, many more compounds that could be useful for human beings.
Dr. Goes, is there anything new to be discovered about Noctiluca?
There's so much to be discovered about Noctiluca. There's so much that we do not know. And so it's really important that we try, for instance, we do not know what is the interaction between the host Noctiluca cell and the endosymbionts that live within Noctiluca. So how do they exist in this symbiotic relationship is something that we really need to understand. And here at Columbia University, we have partnered with scientists and engineers from the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And they are allowing us to harness the power of nanotechnology to study these interactions. So one of the biggest developments that has taken place is that they've been able to develop a chip, an optical chip that can be inserted in Noctiluca cell. This chip is about 50 microns. It's thinner. It cannot be seen with the naked eye. You need a microscope to see it. And it has got the complete electronics on it. And so this chip, when inserted inside the cell, will be able to tell us the internal environmental conditions like the amount of uric acid there is in the cell, the amount of ammonium, the pH, the CO2 concentrations, the oxygen. So without killing the cell, if you're able to get this data streamed to us as the cell is evolving and growing, it can tell us a lot more about this ecosystem within Noctiluca. So the cell looks like a greenhouse with a lot of these endosymbionts within it. And so we really need to understand how they interact with each other and utilize each other to grow and outcompete other organisms.
Will Noctiluca blooms spread to other areas of the world as oceans warm, become more acidic and less oxygenated?
That's our hypothesis at the moment. And we are seeing early signs of it. Noctiluca has been seen throughout Southeast Asia now, and in parts of Tanzania, Kenya. So it's spreading down southwards. And it has also been reported from the Maldives. It has been reported from Seychelles. So it's expanding its range. And I think as the oceans warm and become more and more hypoxic, and many parts of the world's ocean are tending towards this state where you have low oxygen concentrations in the water and the warming taking place. So I would not be surprised if we see it being reported from China over the next few years as well. So it is expanding not only southwards in the Indian Ocean, but it's also migrating to the Pacific Ocean.
Noctiluca's effects extend beyond fisheries to broader economic interests. What are the other negative impacts of Noctiluca blooms?
Yes, so one of the countries that we have been working very closely is the Sultanate of Oman. And we've been working with the Ministry of Fisheries over there to develop an early warning system. And the reason why it's important for them is it not only affects their food, the amount of fish they are landing, but one of the greatest fears is that it affects their water supply. So whenever you have absolutely, it is a huge water security issue in that area.
Desalination plants or?
Yes, most of these countries actually depend on seawater that comes into desalination plants, and it produces fresh water. Now, when you have Noctiluca and jellyfish in the water, they clog the intake channels of seawater, and that cripples the plants from functioning. And so they have these periods where they have shortages of water. So it's a water security problem in that area. It's a food security problem. And it's also a national security problem because, naval vessels that patrol that area, the time that they can spend at sea is reduced because they too depend on seawater for fresh water. They have desalination plants on board. So when you have this excessive amounts of jellyfish or Noctiluca in the water, it clogs their intake. And so instead of being able to stay for about 5 or 6 days, they sometimes they can stay in the water just for about 2 or 3 days. So their endurance out at sea is also reduced. So their ability to patrol the waters over longer periods is also reduced. So we have not only the Oman Navy operating in that region to keep the oil route open, but we have countries from the USA has got its naval fleet over there. We have China, France, and all are operating. Initially, it was to control piracy. But can you imagine if the endurance of the ships is reduced? It also is an energy security problem for us. So there is a connection between energy supply and this tiny organism that is spreading throughout the region. And the Arabian Sea is a gateway to the Middle East. So we have to look at all angles of what impacts it's having on that, not only the ecosystem, but the water and energy security issues in that region.
Yeah, it's an extremely strategic area, and it's amazing to think that a microorganism like that can impede the operational efficiency of navies and
Absolutely, yes.
by impact perhaps energy security and trade flows.
Yeah, and one of the unique things that I didn't mention about Noctiluca earlier is that it exists at the surface. And you would think that this organism is able to photosynthesize better under these conditions. But it turns out when they come to the surface, they resort to this feeding mode. So they feed really aggressively when they're at the surface, but they do well, they photosynthesize better when they're in low light. So you may ask the question, what are they doing with this excess light energy that they're absorbing? So it turns out whenever you have this Noctiluca blooms, the water gets heated up as well. So this heating of the water is accelerated. So the seawaters become warmer than normal when you have a Noctiluca bloom. So we are not very sure right now, but we think that it is having an impact on the monsoon cycle as well.
So there is a feedback loop.
Yeah, it's a feedback factor, the biological feedback. The other thing is that Noctiluca produces a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids, lipids. It forms these globules that you can see very clearly under a microscope. So it can be used as a food supplement if you can extract those oils within Noctiluca.
I'd like to now move to consider land ecosystems, Dr. Goes. What are the causes of algal blooms in lakes?
Yeah, algal blooms in lakes are quite common, but this year the the problem was pretty severe. Most of our lakes had huge outbreaks of algal blooms.
Here in the
And
United
the reason
States.
is, yes, throughout the continental USA, they were reported from Europe as well. So one of the problems this year in particular was we had an extremely warm summer. We had temperatures that were in excess of 2 degrees than normal, and most of these lakes became warmer and more conducive to the growth of this algae. So the organisms that cause this outbreak in lakes are slightly different than the ones that we see in coastal waters or open ocean waters like Noctiluca. And the reason why they can thrive in lake waters is because lake waters contain excessive amounts of phosphate. And this is sodium biphosphate that is used to make drinking water a little alkaline. And the reason why we do that, especially in states like New York, is that we had a plumbing system that relied on lead pipes in the past. And we have, when we make this water alkaline, it precipitates out all the heavy metals like lead, iron, and so humans are prevented from consuming it. So the reason why they make the waters alkaline is to reduce the load of heavy metals or completely eliminate it. Now, this excess phosphate is present in most of our lake waters. And the algae that benefits from this are cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. That's a common name for them. And so these organisms are able to fix atmospheric nitrogen, and they're able to use this excess phosphate that is present in the water. Other phytoplankton that are present in the water run out of nitrogen or nitrate. And because the cyanobacteria are able to fix atmospheric nitrogen, they are able to utilize that excess phosphate and thrive in those waters. So when you have a warm year and the water is really calm and stratified, you have this algae growing like crazy. And in fact, right from the Great Lakes in the north to many of the lakes down south, even in Florida, you had these massive outbreaks of algal blooms this year. Right next to our university, we had the Morningside Park, where there's a small pond where we've been seeing these huge blooms of cyanobacteria, and they mostly belong to a group called microcystis, which can sometimes be toxic and harmful to humans. And so if you go to most of the lakes around the city or ponds around the city, you'll see signs that have been put up that there's a harmful algal bloom outbreak and the waters could be toxic for your pets. So they advise you not to go into the waters.
Are there ways to control or reduce algal blooms?
Yes, so we have done some preliminary tests in the lab and we have identified some minerals that can be used to control this. And these are very simple solutions that can be immediately used for controlling these blooms. In the past, some of the minerals that have been prescribed include clay, and this is commonly used in China, where the clay contains some compounds. One of them is lanthanum. Clay also sticks to the algae, and this cooperative sedimentation that occurs allows the algae to sink, and so it takes them out from the water column. What we have prescribed is slightly different. For the Arabian Sea blooms, I mentioned that we need the waters are hypoxic, so we need some compounds that can make the waters oxic, so increase the oxygen levels. And one of the most common ways I think that would control these blooms in lakes as well is that if you start bubbling the water, because most of these organisms cannot grow when the water column is agitated. So, and it's oxygenated as well.
What is the role of satellite technology in terms of monitoring and managing invasive algal blooms?
Yes, so for a long time, since the year 1997, 1998, we have had satellites that measure the color of the oceans. And so the color of the oceans can tell you what species are there in the water. So in the past, we had these multispectral sensors, which measured the light reflected from the oceans at certain wavelengths. Because phytoplankton themselves absorb a lot of light that impinges on the surface of the ocean. So depending on what kind of pigments they have, they'll absorb a particular kind of light. So the light that is unutilized or not absorbed by these pigments is reflected back. And the color of that light will tell you, if you invert that reflectance signature, it will tell you what are the pigments in the water. And from those pigments in the water, you can infer what kind of phytoplankton are there. Now, it has been a little bit difficult to identify exactly what kind of species that are there in the water with using multispectral sensors. But we have a satellite that is going to be launched by NASA in January of 2024. It's called PACE. It's a hyperspectral sensor. So it measures it at many, many more wavelengths than the normal satellites do right now. And so that will give us the ability to look at a multitude of pigments and actually look at the reflectance signatures to look at a specific kind of phytoplankton in the water. Once the satellite goes up in space, it will provide us the ability to monitor how these algal blooms are evolving. So you can monitor where the blooms are appearing, and you can target your solution or whatever minerals that you want to put out to control the blooms. So in that way, you can manage the blooms. It's like monitoring forest fires from space. So once you identify which regions are prone to fire and where the fire is occurring, you can target your aircraft to go and dump the fire retardants. In our case, it will be a chemical or a mineral that will reduce the growth of this algae and stop it from spreading.
And going back to the algal bloom in the Arabian Sea that you've been studying for years, that is so large it can be easily seen from space, I read.
Yes, it can be seen from space, but for a long time, we didn't know whether we could monitor it from space. We can only say it's absent or present. But with the new satellite, we can tell what is the actual quantity. So it will give us an idea of the amount of Noctiluca that is present and what will be the amount of treatment that you can apply to control it.
As part of satellite technology, how does ocean color sensing help us address large-scale climatic questions?
That's an excellent question. Actually, once you are able to get an overview of how the algal blooms are evolving from space, you can connect it with other satellite data. And for instance, in the Arabian Sea, we were able to discern what was causing the spread of these blooms, and we were able to trace it to the melting of snow caps in the Himalayan mountains. So this wouldn't have been possible by ships or data being collected by ships alone. You need something that will give you the big picture. And so we were able to connect the dots and find out that the melting of the snow in the Himalayan mountains is causing the warming of the Arabian Sea, the spread of hypoxia as well. And this in turn was affecting the ability of Noctiluca to grow. So we recently reported that the range expansion of Noctiluca is actually tied to the snow melt in the Himalayan mountains, the shrinking of the snow caps. So that wouldn't have been possible without the help of satellite data. So satellite data now provides you information about sea surface winds, the currents. So it can tell you how this algae is moving in the water, for instance, how it's spreading. It gives you information about the temperature at which they grow, for instance. And so we can use this information in models actually to predict the outbreaks of these algal blooms. And it's useful for tourism as well. Whenever you have algae in the water, people do not like to go into the water because the waters are green and they're not blue. So people avoid water. So it has a huge impact on tourism and all forms of seawater recreation.
As we come to the end of our conversation, what would you like the public to understand about the role of plankton in our oceans and how they impact climate, food, and water security?
Every second breath that we take comes from the photosynthesis and oxygen production that algae have. But within this broad group of algae, you have some that are bad players. They're known as harmful algal blooms. Some of them produce toxins, like the ones that you see off the coast of Florida that decimate fisheries. They're also found in Maine, where they have a huge impact on the shellfish industry over there. They're also found on the West Coast. And in the Arabian Sea, we have Noctiluca, which doesn't produce any toxins, but it's having a huge impact on the food chain, on the food supply, the water security of that region, and I also mentioned energy security as well. So one of the things that we have to realize is that not all algae are bad, that there are only a few bad players, and they seem to be doing better than some of the good guys. So I think with the new developments in technology and our ability to develop methods to contain them or harvest them for some other use, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some opportunities also that are becoming available to us to harness these organisms and put them to other use. For instance, Noctiluca, as I said, can be used as a huge source of polyunsaturated fatty acids. It can provide a source for fertilizers. It can also be harvested for UV screening compounds, which can be used in cosmetics. So the other harmful algal blooms may have some properties that could have some medical applications, medicinal applications. So what we have to be mindful about is that what is causing these changes in our ecosystem is the warming of our waters, and that is directly related to the carbon dioxide that is released into the air, and also to our use of our resources on land. So the more we pump nitrogen and phosphorus into our oceans, it creates this problem of eutrophication, where you have outbreaks of algal blooms. So we've got to realize that every action has a response in the ocean ecosystems. It's not only the warming that happens in the open ocean that is causing these large blooms like Noctiluca, it's also happening in your backyard, in the lakes and ponds that we see. And we also have to be mindful about the eutrophication that is being caused by human activity on land. So we have to find ways of managing our wastewater. In countries like the Middle East, you'll be surprised to know that they use tertiary treated seawater actually to grow plants in this desert lands. So there are ways that treated sewage water can be used productively.
So algae themselves are essential, and most of them are good algae, but invasive algal blooms are harmful.
Yes. So algae form the basis of the food chain, and all proteins from the sea exist or come to be because of the carbon dioxide that is algae housed from the atmosphere. And there are some scientists that are toying with the idea of geoengineering solutions, causing algal blooms deliberately in the oceans so that they can harvest CO2 from the atmosphere.
So algae are essential and could be even more essential.
Yes, if If you get the right algae to suck out the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, you can use it to have a harness to store carbon. You can use it as a food source for other organisms. You can grow fish in those waters if you're interested in aquaculture. And you can harvest some other compounds from that could be beneficial for human beings. So not all algae are bad. There are a few bad players, as I mentioned, but algae in general are good.
I think we'll leave it there. Dr. Goes, thank you very much for talking with us on Discern This.
Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed this conversation with you. And I wish you all the best as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.